Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for this very interesting session, webinar that we have for you. It is related to banking support for SMEs. And apart from the topic being very interesting for SMEs and very pertinent, I would say at the moment, we will be going through the various developments related to this topic that happened within the last few weeks, within the last few months, with the changes that COVID brought about. We also have a number of very pertinent speakers, amongst which are Mr. Paula Bela, our president, who will be doing the introduction. We have the Honorable Clayton Bartolo, who is Parliamentary Secretary for Financial Services and for the Digital Economy. And we have also Professor Joseph Bonici from the Malta Development Bank. He is the chairman of the Malta Development Bank, and Mr. Joseph Said, who is coming from the Malta Bankers Association. He is the deputy chair there, and he is also CEO of Lombard Bank. All these speakers will be helping us go through a number of questions, giving us their insights, and also answering our questions that most of you have passed on before today's session. And we will be even collecting any questions that you might have that might come to mind maybe as we are going on. And I would ask you to put these questions through the chat, which you will find down below, not through the Q&A. And when putting in your question, please select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see them. The panel will be seeing your questions coming in and your reactions, so it would be nice to see you interacting. We are currently live on Facebook for the beginning of this discussion. And Facebook is one of the ways that many members keep in touch with us. You can get in touch with us through Facebook Messenger, apart from calling us, messaging us, emailing us, of course, and any other standard communication methods. And we also have a WhatsApp alert system. For those of you who have not yet registered, the number is 9999 5199, so 495199, and in that way we can alert you of the most important issues relating to your business. So without further ado, because we have quite a few things to go through this morning, and I am looking forward very much to this discussion, I invite our president, Mr. Paula Bela, to give his introductory remarks on the subject. Paul, you are still muted. Can you unmute yourself, please?
All right.
It works.
Good morning to everyone, especially to Mr. Clayton Bartolo, Parliamentary Secretary for Finance Services and Digital Economy, Professor Bonici, and Joe Said. I thank you for this morning, for joining us. First of all, I would like to start that as a chamber, we're always first to every meeting we have that access to finance. Access to finance was our core business for us, and I am proud to say that today we have achieved most of our goals with regards to access to finance for small businesses. Obviously, this special time requires a lot of support, and I can gladly say that full support we found from the Ministry of Finance, from the Malta Development Bank, and from all the banks. We're here today to understand more the loans and overdrafts that Malta Development Bank and banks are affording to our businesses, small and large. From our members, from our feedback, things are improving slowly. Hope that we give guarantees and overdrafts, because I believe that the road to recovery is challenging, and hopefully we will recover sooner than later. I am as well the Vice President of SME United in Brussels, the arm that represents all SMEs in Brussels. And I shared with them the schemes that all our banks and Malta Development Bank have supported our business, and they were impressed with our proposals and with our incentives. As you are aware, there are some countries, they're still seeing what they're going to implement. Some of them, they haven't implemented anything at all, like say Italy. They're still on the drawing board. But here in Malta, because our finances are strong and the Malta Development Bank, which I happen to be gladly a director as well on Malta Development Bank, with the support of everyone, with Professor Bornici and his staff, we managed to get things moving. And I augur this webinar this morning for our speakers, what they have to say this morning, and I wish everyone an interesting meeting to discover more on our banks and our development bank. I thank you all.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. Like me, you are very looking forward to the discussion of today's session. And I also join you in thanking the Parliamentary Secretary for joining us today and giving us time. We have so far had very, very good experiences with Honorable Bartolo. He has listened to us and acted about the concerns that we have presented. And I invite you, Honorable Bartolo, to give a bit of an introduction from your end.
First of all, good morning, Abigail, Paul, Joseph, and Prof. Bonnici. Allow me to thank the Malta Chamber of SMEs for organizing this webinar. It is very interesting to see the way that things are being done also post-COVID, where the digital era seems to be kicking in even more than one would have expected. So that in itself is already a plus side, because I do believe that it also improves efficiency and it also helps us to sustain our environment in the sense that we are also reducing traffic. For example, this webinar here today could have been organized in the form of a meeting where we would have been meeting in some place. While meeting and human interaction is a very nice experience, let's face it. On the other hand, like this, most of us are from our offices, and we don't have to go around with the car, so that is also helping the environment. However, COVID was an experience in itself, and we are just coming out of COVID. I think as a country we have fared very well, better than other countries have done. So starting from the health aspect, I do believe that we have done a very good job. And then obviously there is the other aspect, which is the economy. So on that aspect, we are also working very much, and we have piloted a number of measures which injected around 150 million euros of bank guarantees. And we have also provided the local businesses access to around 750 million euros worth of loans. So that shows the commitment which the government, together with the MDB, and then obviously with the local banks, we have done our work to sustain the local economy. Another example is the introduction of the moratorium, where we have worked to introduce a moratorium to help those who are affected by the COVID, a moratorium which has also been extended recently. So here we see a government which is proactive rather than reactive. And I do believe that one of the main aspects which have helped us in order to weather the storm, to weather the pandemic, was the quick response time of the government. And many times, if the government acts slowly, then the industry will react even slower. So the government needed to be very much on the ball in order to take the necessary actions and also decide in a timely manner about what needs to be done. I think for an opening, that is all. I do look forward to the questions which will be coming up later on during this webinar. Once again, it is my pleasure to be here with the Chamber, working hand in hand. I do believe that the future is a digital one. And I am very much interested in what we will be hearing today and what the Chamber of SMEs has to propose Recently, we also received proposals in order to use more AI in introducing digital concepts for our SMEs. I do believe that that is the way forward. And it is also clear that those SMEs and companies which have invested in technology over the past years, they have managed to weather COVID better than other companies, and now they are better placed in order to recover from the past few months. So there, yes, I do believe that most of what the Chamber of SMEs is proposing in the digital aspect can be brought also on board in line with our vision. But I will leave that to a later stage. Thank you, Abigail, and I do look forward to these couple of hours which are in front of us for this webinar.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And actually, I would like to delve a bit deeper because I think the remit falling under US Parliamentary Secretary is very important. There are a number of very essential institutions falling under your remit, and I also am exposed to some projects that you are carrying out under your Parliamentary Secretariat, including some things that you have already mentioned related to the digital economy. Maybe so that we can start framing a bit the minds of those that are listening to us, to give them a bit of a deeper insight of what falls under your remit and what projects are you spearheading at the moment.
Yes, my secretariat is one of the largest, which one finds within the government, and some would say that it is even bigger than some other ministries. And the way within the secretariat and the way that one plans for the future, I do believe that is a very important sector for our economy. The digital sector of our economy is growing, has been growing for the past years, and we intend to continue increasing it in its importance. And when I say increasing in its importance, I don't mean that other sectors need to reduce their importance. For example, if we have tourism is a very important sector of our economy. Now what we want to introduce is an added diversification in our economy so that we can have additional sectors which are recession and pandemic proof. Effectively, we have seen that the digital sector within the economy has been COVID proof. So that means that it can withstand external shocks to the economy and keep on going forward, and thus sustaining the economic growth which our country needs. I always believe that economic growth is the underlying platform which every government needs to promote in order to be able to then carry out its social program. Unless you are sustaining the economy, unless you are sustaining the public finances, which are very important, especially in today's world, we are where we need actually to reach EU targets, although lately these have also been reduced. However, we still need to continue forging ahead with our national reform program, for example, and in order to do that, we need to have sound finances. Sound finances, they do not come from increasing taxes. We are not a government which believes that we should increase taxes. We are a government which believes that we should incentivize the private sector to continue working more, to engage more in our local economy, to attract foreign direct investment, and also to enhance our local ecosystem. And by this, I mean the digital ecosystem. And in order to do this, we have also created a think tank related specifically to the digital economy, whereby we are discussing a number of initiatives which will be presented in the coming weeks and months. This think tank is dealing with, for example, the gaming sector, which in Malta is already a strong sector. However, we want to continue enhancing the ecosystem. We don't want the companies to come here to Malta just for the sake of having the MGA license, but we want them to come to Malta and enjoy the local ecosystem, whereby they can also continue increasing their contacts with other local companies. Most of these companies, they buy from local suppliers. So the ripple effect within the economy is there, and it is actually being felt from a number of smaller local companies and self-employed who service these gaming companies. We have other sectors which we are discussing. For example, we have the blockchain area, which we do believe that is still very important locally. And we are also taking on a number of initiatives, even at government level. For example, one initiative which we will be dealing with is in the social sphere, where we will be launching a blockchain project related to the social sphere and also to adoptions. So one can say, but how does this relate to the local businesses? What we want is that the government leads by example. So the government will show the safety of the blockchain systems, and then we encourage other local companies to take on blockchain systems within their own systems. Blockchain can be used in a number of areas. For example, it can be used in agriculture, can be used in fishing. It can be used also in other niche and new economic sectors, which the government has introduced in Malta. For example, medical cannabis, whereby we will be bringing together blockchain and medical cannabis. We are not saying that we will be doing it, but I encourage local companies to take up these opportunities in order to spearhead these changes. We also have cloud computing, which we are considering actively, quantum, high-performance computing, and also artificial intelligence, whereby we will be launching a number of projects in this area so that we also start implementing the government strategy of AI, which was recently finalized, and in the coming months, we will start implementing the projects across a number of aspects. And here we see AI and Internet of Things, both of them coming in together, and we do believe that these two can change also a number of factors within our society in order also to help, as always, our residents to maintain a higher standard of living. Something else which we have recently undertaken was the e-Businessify course together with the Malta Communications Authority, where we are assisting local companies to be able to sell their products online. We have seen through COVID the importance of online. I have seen, for example, local grocers who until a few months ago, they never accepted credit cards. But then suddenly they changed their modus operandi in order to start accepting credit cards, online payments, taking online orders, most of them using social media. So there again, I do believe that the local business community is a resilient one and is one which innovates according to the needs which happen. And in this case, we have seen local small businesses take up this challenge and continue moving on even in such times. So now we do believe that is the time to step up also with regards to e-business and e-commerce. And so we have launched this course in order to help local businesses to take on this new challenge where they can also increase their market share, both locally as well as internationally. We have some very good local producers who unfortunately they don't make enough use of the online space, of online markets. And I do believe that now is the time to help and also encourage them with these endeavors. Finally, I do believe that the pandemic has given us the chance to rethink our economic model. I am not saying that previous economic models were not good. They did work, they did give us results. However, now is the chance for us to examine this economic model, which we employed up until a few months ago, and see how we can improve on that. And I do believe that there, in that aspect, we're also working on attracting to Malta new sectors, such as, for example, the video game development sector, where there we can see high value-added companies which come to Malta. They offer employment opportunities for our young up-and-coming programmers, while at the same time being ambassadors of our name, of Malta's ecosystem, which we are also creating in that aspect, together with also esports. Esports is another up-and-coming sector. It is a niche sector within the economy, and our aim is that within a few years we will have 1% of the GDP accounting to video game development and also esports. So those are a small part of our plans of what we are planning for the future.
Thank you very much for that. And yes, we do concur that the online challenge has been addressed very, very well by the business community during COVID, and we have seen steps we wouldn't have seen in a number of years, I believe, if COVID did not happen. And also, we ourselves have started an initiative. We have started this last year in order to help businesses understand artificial intelligence, and that it's not something so abstract. It is something that we actually use on a daily basis, and it can greatly facilitate the way we do business and the way we interact with our clients. And there are very easy and accessible ways to start from. But that is something maybe we can take up in a separate discussion. Going a bit to the crux of the discussion that we have today, I would like to turn the conversation on Mr. Joseph's side, representing the Malta Bankers Association. Mr. Said, obviously you cannot speak on behalf of all the banks because like businesses, they operate a bit differently from each other, which should be the case. But I would like to ask you from the point of view of the Malta Bankers Association, how have you experienced the needs of businesses change due to COVID in terms of banking support and the requirements in terms of banking support, and what do you think post-COVID will look like? I just remind you to switch on the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. Undoubtedly, the STAR initiative, the COVID measure, was the Malta Development Bank's COVID guarantee scheme. That was undoubtedly the STAR. But it's also to be said that before that, the banks, Maltese banks, did to a limited extent perhaps offer some kind of assistance, either by way of moratorium on repayments or discounted interest rates on increased facilities in those cases where the company, the enterprise was impacted negatively by COVID. But then came the Malta Development Bank's initiative, which is, I would imagine, exceedingly popular and is up and running. I would have thought that the question of moratoria we should not come in dribs and drabs, but I believe that that is driven by the EU, rather than have it in extensions and say we're going to extend this to September and then possibly to April 2021. I think businesses would be far more comfortable and relieved and reassured if they were to be given straight away a moratorium which would allow them to see the horizon. But post-COVID, well, I've been in this business since '68, but I can assure you this is new to everybody. So what do we know about it? What I can tell is that there will be businesses which will die, but those were businesses who are going to die anyway, a natural death somehow at one stage or another, and this has precipitated it. There'll be others that come out stronger because of the measures even which the Parliamentary Secretary himself mentioned. You become more efficient. We were forced into the digital and virtual world, and these meetings are a case in point. I had a meeting until from 8:30 till 10:55, and then I walked into this meeting. It wouldn't have happened elsewhere, had it been a physical meeting. So there's definitely going to be that. I don't know how it's going to impact. I think the recovery may take some time because there'll be a reluctance to travel. The question of a second pandemic is lingering on that. There are areas that will be suffering, I have no doubt, and will take some time to recover. But I'm not in here pandering, to the or flattering anybody. But I think the COVID measures of NDB are intrinsically good, and they misunderstood by some, mainly the SMEs, because they seem to think that this is a government handout, which it is not. The proposals have to make business sense. They are not there to help. The fund allocated by Malta Development Bank is not there to help somebody who was in difficulties pre-COVID, but to help those industries and those businesses which suffered because of COVID. And there's a misunderstanding or misconception that the risk of banks is only 10%, which is wrong. It is not 10%. It can go up to 45% in a scenario where the pool of lendings that the bank makes may go belly up, but that is understandable from a Malta Development Bank point of view. They can't just issue guarantees, blind guarantees for 90% of a lending. So that makes sure that the banks lending the money are practicing some form of self-regulation. But that, generally speaking, I think the banks are playing their part as they have always done. I mean, I have always had issues with GRTU and SMEs and all that, because there's a feeling that banks are the access to finance. I challenge anybody to bring me a proposal which made business sense and which lacked finance, which lacked success because of lack of finance. So I think banks have always done, and one look at the hotels in Malta, 90% of the hotels, I'm talking the old established hotels, came at a time when banking was very rudimentary, and there was no collateral, virtually no collateral, and yet most of them succeeded. I see Mr. Abela getting nervous in his chair, but it doesn't matter, we can handle him. Always a pleasure. That's how I see it,
Thank you, Mr. Said. Thank you for your openness and clarity, which makes me even more comfortable for the questions that I have going ahead.
Go ahead, no problem.
We will get to the Malta Development Bank scheme, which is, as you said, very important, and it was essential. And we also welcomed the moratorium move, which was very, very important. We needed something that would work across the board and something that was up to a certain extent a standard and not...
If I were to make a suggestion on the moratorium, I would actually go straight away and say there's a moratorium on a year, but not without repayments. I can speak for one particular bank, which actually came up with proposals which predated the MDB, and which said, we're going to let you have a moratorium on your repayments, but to the extent of only 80% of your repayments, because a basic tenet in lending is to always remain in contact with your client. And therefore we said, we're not going to give you 3 months, we're going to give you 12 months. But you have to pay only 20% of your repayment. If you want to pay more, that's all well and good, and you won't be charged any penalties. Because I think a businessman needs to have the reassurance that he's not going to have the bank breathing down his neck for the repayment. And if I could make a suggestion, these tranches of 3 months, because that's how it's been so far, from what I recollect, I don't think they're reassuring enough. The reassurance is you don't have to speak to us before another year. Go and do your business, recover your business, but I would like 20%, because everybody can afford 20% of a repayment, even in a crisis situation. There will be exceptions, yes, of course, there always are. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that positive suggestion. And I wanted to share with you a couple of slides coming out of two exercises of research that we have done with SMEs, now seeing it a bit from the other side, from the user side. And basically they will come up on the screen shortly, but I wanted to explain them in the meantime. Basically, during COVID, we have carried out research with businesses to understand how they are experiencing COVID, how is their business doing, and what is their reaction to a number of initiatives by the government and also by the banks. In fact, we have asked them, how would you rate the level of your bank's support during the current time? And we carried out this question was carried out twice at 2 different intervals, one in April and another one in June, which, as you appreciate in times of COVID, even though they might sound that they were close in April and June, in COVID, many things were changing in a very short period of time. And this is basically...
Could you reduce with the font size, because to get the whole picture, please?
We will be putting them up one after the other, and I will also be explaining the difference. So from April, what we see is that, so first 1 to 5, 1 is the lowest, as you can see on the screen, and 5 is the best score, and 3 is considered satisfactory. In April, we saw that those that said it was satisfactory, it was 31%, compared to 37% in June. Those that said that it exceeded satisfaction, so they gave a 4 to 5 score. In April, it was 14%. In June, it was 20%. In total, satisfaction to beyond satisfaction in April was 45%, and in June, it was 57%. Now, when it comes to lower than satisfied, so not satisfied or not satisfied at all, giving a 1 to 2 score, in April, it was 56%, and in June, it was 43%. So we can see a good improvement in comparing April to June scenario. And of course, we have our own interpretation, but I wanted to hear your interpretation. Firstly, of course, I just wanted to point out that from the feedback we received from businesses at that point, at those specific junctures, in April, there was the issue related to the Malta Development Bank scheme had still not settled. We were still seeing which banks were going to take it up. You say that there was a bit of misunderstanding from the side of SMEs, Mr. Said. We saw a lot of misunderstandings from the side of the banks as well, related to the Malta Development Bank scheme. And until the dust settled, so to say, and everyone knew what they can offer and how they can put it to work, we then saw a bit of an improvement in the June, which is this one in the June graphs. I wanted to start with Prof. Bonici, since I myself, as a Chamber of SMEs, attribute this improvement mainly to the Malta Development Bank scheme, to see what he thinks about it.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Very interesting results, which are consistent with the results we have actually yesterday evening. In fact, I got the latest data for mostly May and June, because in April the scheme was launched, but it took a few weeks till the banks could sign the relevant agreements that they had to be part of. So we're talking about 2 months. Now, if we look at these 2 months, June is even higher than May, but in total, approximately 200 million of loans have been approved by the banks. Of these, 161 have already been sanctioned. So that's where the letters have been sent out, and it involves about 251 businesses. Now, the split of these businesses is very, very interesting, because out of these 251 businesses, 237 are SMEs. So, and the others are 15 are the larger entities. And these 237 SMEs are responsible for around 100 million of these 161 million of approved loans. So we're looking at the bulk of the funds actually being used by SMEs. The 15 large enterprises that so far have been sanctioned is about the 61 million. In total, in terms of jobs involved within all these entities, there's over 13,000 jobs of these entities that have been, that these entities employ. So we can say that there's been a support for a significant part of the workforce. In terms of split, the biggest two sectors actually is obviously accommodation and food services, which is about 25%. Wholesale and retail is another 22%, so almost 50% is in accommodation, food services, and wholesale and retail. There's about 12% in construction, another 12% in transport and storage, and almost 7% in manufacturing. So the need of the manufacturing sector has been much less. This is, of course, still ongoing, this type of activity, the COVID guarantee scheme. We are also in the process of negotiating with the Commission part of the scheme where for loans less than 250,000, the guarantee that banks are requesting would be reduced to about 20%. And this we're still in discussion phase, but basically to reduce the kind of soft guarantee that the banks are, or soft collateral that the banks are requesting. So at least for those loans that are less than 250,000, basically we need clearance by the Commission on this because it obviously these are things that the competition directorate of the Commission looks very closely at. But we are hopeful that loans which are less than 250,000, which is about 64% of all the loans actually, will find it easier in terms of collateral requirements. As Mr. Said, as Joe said very well, these are loans, not grants. So with a loan, you always need to have a commitment to repay it. It could be the terms are obviously spread. There's an interest rate subsidy, which is very important. I think one of the government measures that has had a big impact. And there's the moratorium. There's the initial year or two where things can be pushed further forward. Hopefully, the economy will start recovering even more by then. Naturally, the role of the development bank was to facilitate all this and reduce the risk of banks, because let's face it, when there's a kind of a recession and low economic activity, the capacity of banks to take more risk is also reduced because obviously they have to make provisions, they have to take care of their risk aspects. They are regulated either by the local authorities or by the ECB. And the development bank probably came just at the right time to enable such a scheme to operate in a way that reduces the tendency for banks to reduce their activity when the risk is higher, because obviously they have to manage their risk. So this is the way the development bank has been operating. Post-COVID, and I was very interested to hear the parliamentary secretary talking about the digital economy. The digital economy is a part of the favorite targets of the development bank. We currently have negotiated a loan with KfW, which is the biggest development bank in Germany, who have been supporting us in a number of ways. So we have negotiated a loan of 45 million, which is part of it is already here, in fact, which will provide the capacity of the development bank to on-lend these funds with the commercial banks' participation. And Joe being here, I encourage the Bankers Association to look at the facilities that we can work together post-COVID. We can complement the banks. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We are not at all intended to compete with the banks, but we can complement the banks and enable them to take up loans which normally they would find riskier and uncertain because of the area. Maybe it's a digital area and it's a little bit more unknown in terms of, you know, when you're lending for this kind of activity. With our involvement, we can provide some funds for that to complement those of the banks. So this reduces the exposure of the banks, but we can also provide a guarantee in part on the element that the banks are lending. So this is a co-funding scheme that we can develop. We have started this scheme with 1 or 2 banks so far, but it's open to all the banks. And I think this is the right time to conclude the structures now that the all banks have been working hand in hand with the development bank to work on a similar structure, but intended for the post-COVID phase when new investments will be required. Even if new investments are required now, we are quite happy to complement the banks. So, you know, this is the development bank is a new institution. And anything new sometimes takes a bit of time for the other institutions to find a way of operating effectively with it. And you know, my appeal is for greater capacity of the banks to look forward and to utilize us to increase their business, but also to increase the business of the economy and make the economy even more efficient, as the parliamentary secretary has said, and more capable of being more shock-proof, you know, so that we are a highly exposed economy because of our huge percentage of exports to our GDP. But it doesn't mean that we cannot diversify, we cannot innovate, we cannot be in sectors which are less subject to ups and downs. So you know, we have a role here to play, and we are available for business, basically, through the commercial banks. I mean, this is the whole scope of the development bank.
Thank you, Prof. Bonici. In fact, you have anticipated a number of things I wanted to ask you with that. It was very thorough and also forward-looking in terms of where the multi-development bank and its initiative that it would like to take. And therefore, I would like to take up Mr. Said on what you just have said, and also going back on the research that we did and what I mentioned in April. The positive feeling of businesses, of SMEs towards the banks was 45%. This improved to 57% in June. What do you make out of this, Mr. Said? Is this something that you are comfortable with? having 43% saying that they feel that the level of support during COVID was a bit lacking and not up to their satisfaction. Is it something that you, as the Malta Bankers Association, seek to improve? Because this is, at the end of the day, the experience that your users have in interacting with the individual banks. I just remind you to switch on your microphone.
Well, I don't know the extent, the quantitative or qualitative level of the survey which you carried out. I'm not questioning it.
Very good question. Over 370 responses coming from SMEs of different sizes and sectors.
Yeah.
And this is sent to a very large number. So that, yes, we do think it to be represented.
Without going into too much detail, in April, the Malta Development Bank, I don't know whether you realize what happened. MDB came up with its proposal. Then government came up with this proposal also on the interest rate. And eventually it was rolled into one. And just to let you, banks lend other people's money. Banks don't lend their money, they lend other people's money. So they have a duty towards their depositors. And that is what our regulator sees, nothing else. How careful are you with other people's money? This is the primary function of a bank. Now, when we're talking about taking risks, there has to be a reward to that risk, and there has to be a certain level. Banks are perhaps the most regulated institutions on this island. So, just to give you an idea, and this is also for yourself and also for Mr. Abela as a benefit. According to IFRSs, today as we speak, if a business fails in its repayment, its installment is past due by over 90 days, there will be situations where it has to be classified as non-performing. They have to stay there for up to 3 years in non-performing, even though they may become performing. Plus, the bank is obliged to take a view on the feasibility of that business. Wait for it. For the next 20 years. So you have to factor in COVIDs, NOVIDs, JOVIDs, all the sort of OVIDs you can imagine. So this is where banks are coming from. So banks can't just dish out their money. Now, why were your members or whoever it was not so satisfied with the reaction of banks? Because NDB, rightly so, presented us with a risk-sharing agreement. They said, this is your risk-sharing agreement. Here's Prof. Bonici, so he knows, he knows it all. It was a 52-page document, which we had to go through, exercising all the due diligence that we are obliged to exercise before signing up. Once we signed up, then it was okay. So it took time. That is the only reason why. And obviously, if you look at the mindset and the mind frame of your members in April, when things were getting nasty, do you blame them for not being happy with banks which were not preferring cash and saying go and take whatever you need? Of course, they're not going to be that happy. Of course, they were more comfortable later on when there was more visibility as to how we're going to interact with NDB. Now there's a relationship going on, and now it's much smoother. But what your members have to understand is banks don't lend their money. They are lending other people's money. In the case of a bond, no problem. The regulator regulates at the bond issue. But then if the company doesn't do well, the money has gone out. It's going to be out there for the next 5-10 years, possibly rolling over. And as we all know, a rolling loan gathers no loss, as they say. So that's how it is. So yes, banks are not there to just dish out money. And the MDB loan, which, as I said, the concept is great. I think it's, if I were to suggest it, it's overly generous, but that's a political decision. So it's not my remit at all. It is extremely generous because they're paying next to nothing. And in nothing comes for free. It's almost coming for free. If I had to suggest, I'll repeat what I said earlier. I think people should be given, the moratoria should be, because eventually, because Maltese entrepreneurs, with a few exceptions, are extremely resourceful, eventually they will land on their feet. Even the ones that got the biggest knock will eventually land on their feet. So what they need is the benefit of time. And like anybody who is responsible and who has a commitment, time is can exercise a lot of pressure on you, the lack of time to repay. So that's what I would have done. I would have actually extended, but then the regulator comes in, and the regulator can't say this is forbearance, which is what the banks get told. The banks get told this is forbearance, therefore you have to provide. Therefore you have to classify that loan as non-performing, because the banks get in between a rock and a hard place very often. And obviously, the rock being, let's say, the SME, ignores the fact that the hard place is a regulator, and banks have to definitely bow to the regulator. I don't know whether that answers your question.
What I wanted to see as well, even more so since you say it, the MDB is overly generous, your willingness to participate in future schemes with the MDB and to start engaging in discussions as of now, since it's very early to discuss post-COVID, but in the way things are changing, we know that for businesses to recuperate, they will need help. They will need more help than just the moratoria. They will need help to reinvest and to consolidate their position, because at the moment, COVID is not the flu. COVID is an unprecedented, devastating scenario. So that is why very special and exceptional schemes are necessary.
But also equally exceptional and necessary measures have to be taken by the entrepreneur himself. Many Maltese companies are grossly undercapitalized, and there are some are historical reasons for that. Some of them are cultural, for them being undercapitalized. But when you get companies with debt to equity being something like 3:1, then that spells trouble. And please never overlook the fact that the banks are lending other people's money. Okay, so some companies need to, because as we all know, more it's innate in us. People put their money into property. They sink their money, they sink their savings into property, which is not a bad thing by no means. By no means. But as we speak, we have seen two companies, one in the service industry, which had sold its assets, its fixed assets, and leased them back because they felt they did not need that, because the advisors, their financial advisors said, you don't need it. It will improve your EBITDA if you get rid of your fixed assets. And then COVID hit and they're on their knees. And then a company in the same industry, rather than did that, put kept its assets, its fixed assets, its property, and now can survive. So, because one had a high debt to equity ratio and the other had a low debt to equity ratio, or equity to debt. And unfortunately, there is a tendency And there is a reluctance because there is an availability of credit in Malta. This is why I challenge that the question that there is access to finance is difficult. Access to finance in Malta is definitely not difficult. For the right people, it is definitely not available for the wrong people. Because if you look at bankruptcies in Malta, if I may, if you look at bankruptcies in Malta, and obviously without mentioning names, we can mention a handful of them, because people eventually don't go bankrupt in Malta, because eventually they cough up and pay their dues. So, but access is available, but not available obviously to the wrong borrowers. But banks, we make our money on lending. We don't make our money on anything else. So why should the bank be reluctant to lend?
Can I intervene, Abigail?
Of course.
Mr. Said, I've been in business for 55 years, and I remember the years my father was a grain importer, which he had an overdraft of 60,000 Maltese pounds without any guarantees, just on a piece of paper.
Absolutely.
No letter of undertakings, no guarantees whatsoever. But things have changed. What I can say today, being a director on Malta Development Bank, obviously I'm understanding a little bit more better, not the banking, because I'm not saying that I'm an expert in banking, but with the experience at the Development Bank through Prof. Bonnici, with his experience, I came and started to understand the procedure. That's why at EU level, when I was at Brussels at EEC, European Social Committee, I always comment on the over-regulation the EU is putting on banks. Because small businesses, they have to have access to finance is essential. And you know that not all the banks are equal. There are some banks more easier to get loans from others. So that's what our chamber is always contesting. And yes, hopefully we know that you are lending other people's money. At the end of the day, you know, the money nowadays, nobody pays any interest at all for the depositors. So they are in a situation that you have cheap money coming in from the depositors as well. So one have to consider that. But I think there was an improvement, and I think between, that's why we are collaborating with the Bankers Association, that eventually we will have a happy medium, and our small businesses will find more financing from the local banks.
Yes, thank you. Incidentally, there's another aspect which we tend to overlook. Historically, banks were divided into 3 or 4 categories. They had the commercial banks, you had the mortgage banks, the home loan banks, you had the long-term banks, and you had the investment banks, which were not banks. So commercial banks never lent beyond a 5-year horizon because their deposits never extended beyond 5 years, and therefore to have an adequate liquidity coverage ratio, they lent for 5 years and borrowed at 5 years. Earlier on, the parliamentary secretary and I think Professor Bonnici also mentioned new areas in the digital economy and all that, and let's hope the banks will be more forthcoming. Yes, but let's not forget that these are commercial banks. As such, we're not venture capital banks. These are commercial banks. It has to make business sense. We are not merchant banks. They don't exist. Merchant banks in Malta don't exist, where they take some equity in the new venture and say, we'll put some equity, we'll lend them some debt, and then there'll be something for the on the upside for us. It doesn't exist in Malta. Actually, the legislation doesn't even allow us to take more than 5% in a business which is not banking related or financial services related. Because after 1980, and this happened in England, and Malta until then used to follow it, where you had You had Lohombus, which did only home loans, 20-year home loans.
I need to ask you to wrap up as if you
I'm
can.
ready.
But we can. Okay.
I'm ready.
Thank you for telling us.
Abigail, if I may.
Yes. I'm going to ask something to you, and if you want to include everything at one go.
All right.
Okay. It's going to be a bit of a lengthy question because it relates very much to what we were saying, but focusing on additional issues that SMEs tell us. Basically, members complain frequently of excess bureaucracy, significant difficulties in opening accounts, and service providers telling us that they can give companies opening in Malta an A to Z service apart from opening a local bank and having a local banking operation. And this business is lost to foreign countries that qualify as jurisdictions of good repute. And also I wanted to give the general sentiment of what, making it a bit clearer of what members are saying. Basically, they have been told that they cannot open accounts because the banks, from the bank side, they do not match their risk profile. This is a company from the professional services sector. They do accounting, they do taxation, they do company formations, and they were told that they are not able to open a bank account for them because they are foreign owned. Obviously, this is a Maltese company paying tax, employing people who pay their own tax and their national insurance in Malta, but banks cannot open an account for them in Malta. Other instances, they also open, of course, they make company formations and they go to the banks to open accounts for their clients. Obviously, they carry out the whole KYC requirements before onboarding and also after onboarding. They are companies that operate zero cash-based transactions. They have regular bookkeeping, accounting, and everything, audit, VAT returns. Even in simple industries like the marketing industry, just because they are foreign owned, they just cannot open a bank account. Someone else said that they experience excessive documentation needed to open a new company account, while with the MBR, with the CFR, with the PA number, it took only hours to a couple of days. After 3 weeks, they are still awaiting a reply from the bank, and they have been told, we have clients that have been waiting for months, so just keep waiting. Do you acknowledge that there is room for improvement in this sense, and are there any plans in the pipeline so that we make these steps forward? Thank you. The microphone, please. Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks, Abigail, for the question. Quite a lengthy question, and one which I do believe strikes at heart of what a number of local practitioners tell me. I mean, by way of background, I'm an accountant and an auditor. So up until a few months ago, I used to encounter these same kind of issues which the panelists are being faced with here today. I'm seeing the question in the chat. I'm seeing another 2 questions in the Q&A session. So yes, first of all, and this is both a personal opinion and also one of my political targets to achieve within the coming months. I am not happy with the way that banks are offering the bank account opening to companies, local companies, especially the ones which are owned by foreign shareholders. Now, let me start by saying that in a way, I do understand the banks. I do understand their modus operandi. Banking was, in fact, one of my major areas when I was at university. And my thesis was actually based, I studied the capitalization ratios of the local banks. So while I understand what Mr. Said was saying, that banks, they actually lend out other people's money, let us not forget that local banks, they are very well capitalized. So in that aspect, and also the capital ratios are well within the regulations. But also, we need to keep in mind the fact that during COVID, the amount of deposits in the local banks have increased by a lot. If I'm not mistaken, they increased by about tenfold than what we had in the same period last year. So here we are seeing a large amount of deposits being held with the local banks. And then unfortunately, I cannot understand why certain banks are reluctant to lend out money. I understand the fact that banks have their risk appetite. I also understand the fact that when they are lending out, they need to see that what they are lending out to and the company actually makes business sense. And they also understand the fact of IFRS 9, non-performing loans. So those, I understand them all. However, that is then where the government stepped in. The government stepped in to assist with the moratorium. And I do believe that Mr. Said's suggestion is one which we can actually consider going forward. For example, the fact that we say that we are going to give an additional 6 months at 20% repayment, which I do believe that local businesses will be able to come up with those sort of funds. So in a way, while I understand the banks, however, I cannot accept the position of the banks. I expect the banks to be more in sync with what the government is doing. So if the government is looking at the digital aspect, increasing digital aspect of the local economy, if the government is looking at attracting new niche areas for our economy, for example, I won't go here into the crypto area because I know that there are certain aspects which would take us a whole day of discussion, not just a couple of hours. However, there are other areas. For example, I've had companies reaching out to me that due to the fact that they invested in blockchain, a certain bank would not let them bank with them when this same bank system is based on blockchain. So we have local banks who make use of blockchain, but then they have clients or prospective clients who want to invest in blockchain, but are actually being blocked from making use of their banking services. So there, I think we need to rethink a little bit the whole scenario. And I do look forward to discussing this more with the Malta Bankers Association, who I would like to thank for their support during the COVID-19 period. I would also like to thank the Malta Development Bank. And I welcome the statement made by Prof. Bonnici as regards the co-funding scheme. I do believe that the role of the Malta Development Bank is there also to act in cases of market failure. And I do believe that in some aspects we do have market failure. We cannot have CSPs going abroad, investing their money to attend fairs, to bring clients to Malta, and then when they come to Malta, so let's say within 10 days, they have their company set up, VAT number, PE number, and then when they come to the bank account, they cannot open a bank account. That is the reality which these CSPs are facing. I know that a lot of them, if not all of them, they do their due diligence properly. They ask for the proper documentation. They have their AML, their KYC, their CFT. They are in line with a number of documents which need to be there, which need to be kept as records. And then unfortunately, when they approach the banks, all they are finding are closed doors. So on that aspect, I will be launching very soon an initiative together with Finance Malta, and we will also be including the Malta Bankers Association, because I do believe that they are one of the major partners for us to find a solution to this impasse, so that we engage in a discussion where we find a solution how we can go forward. It may be the case that the banks tell us, listen, there is nothing we can do about this. But at least then we will know where we stand. One of the most frustrating things which a client can face, and here I am also talking from a political aspect, and also remembering what I used to do when I was in the industry. One of the worst things which you can do to a client is leaving him waiting and not giving him an answer. It's okay if we tell the clients, listen, you have to wait 3 months, you have to wait 6 months to get a bank account. that the client will accept that in a way. However, we cannot let them hanging. And when we let people hanging, the people don't say because Clayton Bartolo left us hanging. Those clients will go and say, in Malta, you cannot open a bank account. So there is our country's name there, which is also being put at risk. And we cannot have a situation where the government is working hard to now we're talking about recovery from COVID. However, in major terms, the government will always keep working to continue enhancing economic growth, to continue attracting new FDI to Malta, because that is what is needed. And especially now, since we are looking at attracting more and diverse sectors, such as, for example, when I mentioned esports and the digital video gaming areas. So those are two new up and coming areas, which for some people, they may sound risky because they are new and up and coming. Maybe some other people will tell you, but what was this about? Why am I going to lend money to a company which will develop video games and it does not know whether these video games will be sold? But that is the business model of these companies. That is the business model which in certain aspects can also bring higher returns to these companies. So while on one side I understand the banks, on the other side I do believe that we need to have the banks with a higher risk appetite, with a more open risk menu. And if they need the assistance of the MDB, I am sure that the MDB will be there to assist. I am sure that we, as government, will also make the necessary amendments which need to be done in order to assist. For example, my opinion is that the Banking Act is in time for a revamp. And perhaps one should look at revamping the local Banking Act also with the aim of inviting and encouraging more fintech companies to set up their base here in Malta. Perhaps there may be bankers who are not happy listening to me talking at the moment, but the truth of the matter is that we need to include all of these aspects in our local ecosystem so that we can continue attracting more companies towards Malta in order to create more employment opportunities and also think about the future generations which are coming. Local young people, maybe they won't want to work in a certain area, but they would want to work in new up and coming areas. So why not give them these opportunities? And unless we start planning for today, we won't have these opportunities tomorrow and in the coming years. So on this, yes, there are plans moving forward. I do understand that time is of the essence and time is crucial. Unfortunately, we have had this situation for a number of months and over the past years, I have received a number of comments, some of them even experiencing them myself. And while not pointing fingers, I don't think that we can sustain the situation much longer. I do believe that both local CSPs as well as local companies and foreign shareholders who are setting up their setup here in Malta, they should get a bank account here, yes. Because unfortunately then what will happen is that they will open a bank account in another EU country. So once again, many times I get the point that, listen, because this is coming from an EU directive or EU regulation, but then how come that in other EU countries they get their bank account? It's the same setup, and the setup won't even be in that country. So yes, while all taking all these aspects into keeping them in mind, I do believe that we need to sit down and find a solution as quick as possible, because otherwise we risk losing business. And when I say we risk losing business, I mean that Malta's name cannot be tarnished in that aspect. We have a lot of CSPs who are doing a lot of good work, and I do appreciate the work which they do. For example, back in January, I attended the ICE conference in London. And while I was on the stand set up by Gaming Malta and the Malta Gaming Authority, I couldn't help notice a number of other local CSPs who either set up their stand there. So they actually invested thousands of euros to not just to take their stuff there, but to actually set up a stand there. And I was happy seeing them talking with prospective clients, talking with other companies. And then there were also a number of other CSPs who were just visiting. So that is all. Investment. They invested their money, they invested their time. Most probably, they didn't attend to their local needs in order to try and attract more clients towards Malta. So then I heard this comment even when I was there. We cannot promise our clients that they will have a bank account, or at least we cannot even give them a timeline of when the bank account will be open. So while understanding the banks, however, I also asked the banks to understand these CSPs and the government's frame of mind, where we are looking at continuing to enhance the economy. Economic growth is a very important aspect, and it needs to be sustained over a long period of time. This is the way forward for us to continue then offering the benefits which we are offering. We could offer the 2.5% interest rate payment by the government, which Mr. Said has referred to as being too generous. So I have to thank him in that aspect, because yes, it was a political decision. It was a decision aimed at encouraging the local businessmen to attract and invest more, especially in this time of need. We could only do that because we had sound finances. We have sound finances not because we increased taxes in the past years, but because we created a local ecosystem where the private entrepreneur was encouraged to invest more, was encouraged to employ more people, and also then continue creating a good ecosystem, which in itself continues generating more funds and generating more taxes to the government without actually increasing the tax rates. Now, I know that one of the things which Abigail is thinking about at the moment is whether we will be lowering the rate of tax, because I can understand that the Chamber of SMEs is calling also for this. However, I do believe that in that aspect, one should perhaps study it and study the actual effect of this in order also to continue encouraging investment in the local economy. So although I am not promising anything, however, I am open for a discussion. And as you all know, I'm not a person who shies away from any discussion. However, I think at the moment, the most important issue which we need to discuss before we start discussing anything else related to tax is this issue of bank accounts, and also the support which banks give also to the local community. For example, one thing which I would like to appeal to the banks is to resume normal service now that the COVID-19 pandemic is practically over. I would like to invite the banks to reopen all their branches in all the localities which they have. We have, for example, I hail from Melliha, and I cannot accept the fact that elderly people from Melliha have to travel all the way down to Mosta, most probably, to get their service, because the bank in St. Paul's Bay would be already too full with the residents of St. Paul's Bay. So that is putting added pressure on the local community, which has just come out of a pandemic. So we had the elderly people who I think were some of the worst hit from the pandemic. And unfortunately, they are also the ones who cannot make use of the digital tools which are available, because for them, it may be too much of a challenge. So I do appeal to the banks, and I encourage them to once again reopen all their branches as soon as possible, so that we can start offering normal services to the local communities, as well as to the local small businesses who are in the various localities spread around Malta and Gozo.
Thank you very much, Honorable Bartolo, for that very good intervention. And obviously, Mr. Said has had his virtual hand up for a while. Thank God it was not a physical hand, it was a virtual hand. And I will let you in. But I wanted to include some comments from who is listening to us so that you can include this as well in your reply, Mr. Said. Mark is saying, we are also receiving letters from banks to close certain bank accounts within 2 months without any justification. I am referring to companies paying hundreds of thousands in taxes to Malta, and they want to close the bank accounts for such companies. Something else that is also included in the questions: we are all Maltese. Why are all the Maltese banks closing all clients' accounts on the premise that it is not in their risk appetite? How are we meant to continue to attract business to Malta, setting up shop here, yet the banks refuse to open the account? This is surely not the environment to attract business in Malta. And the same person said, thank you, Honorable Bartolo, you could not have said it better. That is exactly what CSPs are facing. Your assistance on the matter is highly needed and greatly appreciated. Someone is also saying that they are foreign. I am a CSP and a trust company, and I cannot get a credit card for the business unless we give 100% plus security. And going just finally to a remark that, and a question that someone sent before this webinar, but it appeals very closely to the final remark that Honorable Bartolo said. Will the government give an incentive to the banks to finance new projects? It has become increasingly difficult to find financing for new projects, with the banks insisting that we are only considering COVID applications. Over to you, Mr. Said. I think you have to open your microphone.
The last point about banks saying we are only open to COVID applications, I challenge that, because I'm sure all the banks are open for business, whether there may have been one particular bank or a particular bank that's been overwhelmed by COVID applications and therefore can't handle anymore, but I doubt it. So I can't speak for that. With regard to banks closing all accounts without giving any reason for, I think the underlying problem with banks, with the opening of bank accounts, is that there is no standard template on what is required at the opening of an account stage. And I see the PS is, I don't know whether he's still with us, but if the regulators were to stipulate a minimum requirement for opening a bank account, then banks would stop managing fear of the regulator when inspections come along. So if they had to put a minimum requirement and the template, which would be adopted as a minimum by all, then banks would be perhaps less reluctant or less hesitant to open bank accounts, because it's very easy to dismiss this as banks not wanting to open. We are in business. Why should we not want to open? Question, it does when you mentioned somebody commented that banks saying it doesn't fall within our risk appetite. One obligation, one onboarding and ongoing monitoring obligation which banks have is to ensure that the subject, the account holder, is not the subject of adverse media reports. That's all it says. Not an indictment, not a sentence, no, adverse media reports. So if I were to see somehow, malicious or not, adverse media reports on Abigail Marmov, I may use you as an example, Ms. Marmov, is I am technically at fault in continuing my relationship because there are adverse media reports, obviously not the one-off, but if there are various ones, I have to steer clear of that, because if your regulator visits, says, why are you in relation to it? You had all the bells, all the warning bells signaling this. Why didn't you? So if the regulators were to agree on a template for as a minimum requirement, that would help the problem to no end, to no end. So I question this thing about CSPs being turned away. In Malta, the last count I know was there about 350 CSPs. As you know, in Malta we have too much of everything. You know, there are about 50 concrete batching plants. You probably all you need is 5. But you know, in all of Sicily there aren't 50. But in Malta we have a surplus of that's the way we go about things. There are 350 CSPs. I can assure you that if you were to go to each individual bank, nobody would be working with more than 10% of them. And the reason being that you can't handle so many relationships. Plus, some of these CSPs are big operators, others are one-man outfits. And you question why a person would want to go through the whole process of getting himself licensed and ongoingly licensed for 1 or 2 clients. So I question, because ultimately it's in the individual cases, and no two are alike. So there must be a reason, because banks are there to do business. Now, admittedly, there may be a bank which has a policy which is determined from higher authority. Maybe that may be, because that's how entities work. They have an appetite or they don't have an appetite. They don't give a reason. I suspect reasons are, or some generic reason like it doesn't fall within our risk appetite, only to avoid, because you can hardly tell somebody because we don't like the business you do, can you? Or that we don't like the business you are now doing. You can hardly say that, because otherwise you're going to go into a whole controversy. So it says, you know, it doesn't fall within our risk appetite. It's a polite way of saying thank you. That's about it. I don't know what other points were made.
I wanted to just react briefly before I also put a question again to the Honourable Bartolo. In terms of CSPs, the most important thing that everyone should look at is the level and quality of their work, their due diligence. Some do not operate under representatives of SMEs. We are very used to dealing with businesses that are self-employed, one-man shows, and employ very few people. But that is not a direct reflection of how much they invest in their business in terms of quality and how accurate their due diligence system is. Sometimes it is even better than certain companies that employ hundreds of people and they don't know who the heck is their client, and they have invested in their relationship with their clients and know them very, very well and can vouch for them. So I wanted to move to a question to the Honourable Bartolo. We can take a final question, and maybe we can take a final round then. We feel a bit of a feeling of increased fragility when it comes to the financial services sector. Is it really so fragile? Is it something that we are really risking in losing? And we know how important it is for Malta to have a strong financial services sector. And what are we doing to strengthen this sector in Malta for the years to come?
Thanks, Abigail. First of all, allow me to point out that out of all the sectors which fall under my political responsibility, most probably the financial services sector is the one which is most at heart to me. I mean, that was my area of work before I moved into in the seat here, and I miss it a lot. I have to be honest. I miss meeting clients. I miss the fact that you are also assisting small SMEs and also self-employed moving forward with their business. So that is an aspect which I do miss a lot. However, that what I miss now, I am translating it into assisting the financial services industry, which I do believe is one of the most important industries locally, because it employs thousands of people, especially young people who are taking up the financial services as their profession. And allow me to start by commenting on one of your last points regarding the CSPs. Yes, I do believe that there are certain CSPs who maybe do not do their work properly. However, we cannot allow those few CSPs overshadow the large amount of work which is done by the absolute majority of the CSPs. So in that aspect, yes, I have to commend the CSPs for their due diligence, their AML work, their KYC, because in the absolute majority of instances, that work is up to scratch. And when you have a small, maybe a one-man show, sometimes there you have a lower level of risk. And let me tell you why. And I speak from personal experience. When you would get a new client, a new prospective client coming in through the front door, you would know that it's your name which is on the plaque at the front door. It's not, you are not just one in 100 employees, but it is you. You are the person who is responsible for your own well-being, for your own firm, and if you have any employees with you, also for those employees' well-being. So there, in some aspects, I would beg to differ that in those cases, that CSP would actually be more careful when taking on new clients and in the due diligence which is done. And in certain cases, you would also have sort of a gut feeling, because when you start talking to the client, you can straight away understand whether the client is serious about his work, whether he knows what he's talking about. So those factors should all be factored in when we are talking about CSPs. And in this aspect, in the coming months, we will also be launching a number of initiatives. For example, the MFSA recently launched a consultation document, and now they have also launched a feedback statement with regards to the raising the bar, where the fees were also being discussed. And there, on that aspect, I had asked the MFSA to sit down and actually discuss these once again, because I don't want to create an unfair playing field for the small CSPs and the large CSPs. So in that aspect, I do believe that yes, more improvement needs to be done. However, we cannot put anybody at a disadvantage. And this is something which we have been discussing over the past weeks, and it is something which we will be launching going forward later on this year. However, that is not all. There are also a number of strategies which we are working on. For example, we will soon be launching a new capital market strategy. We'll also be launching asset strategy, so that there we can attract new and different funds towards Malta, with the aim of always increasing the opportunities for the financial services industry. And nowadays, given that we are also an international financial center, because that is how we are described effectively, I do believe that one needs to continue advancing and moving ahead with time. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges which we are facing at the moment is money-fund. So I won't shy away from this challenge. I am working very closely also with the Prime Minister on this aspect, and the Minister for Finance, where together we are spending long hours in meetings, especially with the Prime Minister. So I can recount from the past 2 days till 10 o'clock in the evening, discussing the next steps forward, which we need to take as a country in order to pass the money fund. If I may explain a bit, because recently we have been hearing a lot about the money fund. So our first reporting deadline is the 5th of October, where there we will report on technicalities and the legislations which we are passing. And then next year, I do believe it is in February of next year, we will have the FATF deadline, where they will assess us on effectiveness of the legislation which we have. Then the final decision will be announced in June 2021 in the plenary session of the FATF. So a lot of work has been done in the past months in order to bring us up to scratch with the requirements of Manival. A lot of work is also being done by a large number of institutions. If I am to mention, for example, the MFSA and the MGA, both of which fall under my political responsibility, and they have been doing a lot of work, and even internationally, they are receiving recognition for the work which they are doing. So in that aspect, we are also moving ahead. Unfortunately, sometimes the headlines in the news are not justified and do not justify the work which is being done. However, we prefer to continue working hard and then let the results speak for themselves rather than being all over the news and trying to address certain media headlines. What I can promise to all of you here attending this webinar is that we are doing our utmost to pass the Manival test. Recently, we have also passed with flying colors the Venice Commission test. And in fact, yesterday, the Prime Minister, he received a personal letter from the European Commissioner. And now we are fully focused on passing the Manival test. I am also fully committed to ensuring that we as a country come out unscathed from this test. I am holding regular updates, for example, with the gaming companies, with a number of also private practitioners, and basically everybody who asks for an update. We are open and willing to dialogue, and also to make sure that everybody is in sync also with the government, and also to get over this next major hurdle.
Thank you very much for that. Obviously, these next few weeks and months will be crucial, and they are very, very important. I wanted to invite Profs. Joseph Bonnici from the MDB to give us some concluding remarks from his end. Profs. Bonnici, you are a very frequent participant on our panels because MDB has been crucial during these past months, and we thank you once again for accepting our invitation. In your hands.
Yes, very interesting discussion. I'd like to return a bit to what my friend Joe Side said about how banks operate. And of course, banks are funded short with deposits, and they cannot lend long. In fact, he mentioned the 5 years target. But this is where the development bank has a new product. And I'm mentioning this because it unfortunately hasn't, it has been taken up in a few cases by some banks, but essentially we can complement the bank by taking the longer part of an investment. So if an investment requires a time frame, say, of 10 years, and the bank is constrained to 5 years, we can, because we are funded long, we basically can borrow long. When I mentioned KfW previously, we have a 45 million amount borrowed from them at very low rates because they borrow at their AAA institution, which we can combine it with the funds of banks and take up the longer part of the loan, say the part which the banks are not so easy in terms of their funding. This kind of new initiative, it is new. It wasn't available before the development bank. It complements the banks in 2 ways. First of all, if somebody comes and wants an investment, say of $500,000, wants to borrow $500,000, we can split that with the bank. So 50% of it will be on our account and 50% of it will be on the commercial bank's account. We can also provide a partial guarantee on the part that the bank is lending. Plus, we can cater for the longer term. This new product has been accepted or started with one or two institutions, but in general, and then COVID-19 came basically, and this has affected the way the banks operate, because obviously they've had to cope with a kind of a demand for working capital, which, and as Mr. Said mentioned, there were agreements to be signed and so on with the development bank, and these are legal documents. So, you know, they have to be up to scratch, they have to be appropriate for the intended purpose. But there are these other possibilities that we have been pushing and trying to encourage the banks to consider. And there's been a mixed kind of, some banks have responded more quickly than others. But I feel that, you know, this new institution, the development bank, and this possibility of co-funding has not taken up so well. Again, something new. There are all sorts of issues that come up, yes, but these can be handled, you know, technical aspects of how the loan is managed and so on. But especially in this recovery phase, because I do think we have a bit of a problem now. And the problem is that while most of the banks are fully occupied with COVID-19, when it comes to new investments, these are not so straightforward. I've heard people talking to me and saying that, you know, some banks are sort of saying, well, is it the time for new investments? I think it is the time for new investments. I think it is the time actually to start planning about when things recover. We're not going to remain in this forever. The recovery may take short time, may take a long time, but businesses need to reflect, especially certain types of businesses that can consolidate and invest and reorganize and emerge in a stronger position. And in this sense, the development bank can complement the banks in new innovative ways. And my appeal is that we actually do develop this. We've had many meetings. We've been discussing this for a year. Huh? So this hasn't been something that well before COVID-19. But unfortunately, the take-up has been a little bit slow. Of course, banks have a lot of liquidity. So why should they allow kind of the development bank to use part of its liquidity? But I think that is a short-sighted view, because at the end, it reduces their exposure if the MDB is taking part of the funding. Secondly, it reduces their risk because there's the guarantee. And thirdly, it can also take a longer term view. In my opinion, it's a win-win situation. So it's a win for the economy and the businesses. It's a win for the commercial banks. And we are doing our function. We are not a profit-motivated institution. We are a government-owned institution. But we don't want to distort the market. We want to complement and fill the gaps that exist. This is new. And we are still finding that when you have something new, you know, there's a lot of issues that have to be handled. And we've developed very good relations with the banks in COVID-19. They have now all have agreements with us, risk-sharing agreements, service level agreements, because we need, of course, some information from the banks when public funds are being utilized. And because we need some conditions from the Commission under the state aid issues that we need obviously to satisfy as well. However, I think that we are entering a new era in the financial sector, which perhaps requires a little bit of greater capacity to innovate. And this innovation, we are sometimes finding that, you know, we are not being as successful in launching such products quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Bonnici. As I said, it's always a pleasure to have you on our webinars. You and also your other colleagues from the Malta Development Bank, always very useful and helpful with your input. And Mr. Said, can I ask you to give us some concluding remarks from your end?
Well, we're in the service business, so we're there to serve, but not to give out anything for free, because that we do through our CSR programs. Okay, so we're there in business. We will listen and consider anything which makes sense. If it's going to in any way risk our depositors' money, then we'll have to hold back. But we are in business. So there's no reason why we should be turning away business. This is like any other business. Banking is like any other business. The only thing is we're risking other people's money, so we have to be even more careful. Plus, we are highly regulated. We are highly regulated. Malta has had some messes in banking in recent years. So no wonder that people are even more careful, because reputation in banking is of paramount importance. In banking, the question is, the basic tenet is know your customer. So if we know the people, then we'll lend. We cannot lend at an industrial level. We just cannot be indiscriminate. But otherwise, we're in business. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Said, and I invite the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to give us his concluding remarks before our President Paul Abela will be closing the meeting.
Thanks, Abigail. First of all, allow me to thank once again you, Mr. Abela, Chamber of SMEs, for organization of such an interesting session, and also Mr. Said and Prof. Bonnici for their remarks. Allow me to conclude on a point which Prof. Bonnici actually said. We are looking for more innovation, and yes, innovation is key both today and also going forward. And I do believe that now is actually the time to invest. And the country's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic can actually be shortened if we increase this level of investment. And it will also propel us forward for the coming years in economic terms. And this is what we are preparing for. We are preparing to launch also a new digital strategy for Malta. It will be a horizontal strategy, which strategy will also encompass in it other strategies which are also important for the new era. We are looking at, as I have mentioned, esports, which is also important because it can also attract to Malta a new tourism sector, which up till now has not been tapped. We are also looking at areas such as cybersecurity, which is also very important and which today we have not even mentioned. So this is also another aspect which is very important in order to continue encouraging local SMEs to increase also their e-commerce level. So these are all the aspects which we are looking at, and also once again to continue to promote in Malta and continue to enhance our reputation on an international level through digital means and through the digital and technological sector. Tomorrow, I will be taking part in another webinar where I will be pitching Malta to around 1,000 companies which are based in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. They are all companies involved in the technological sphere, all of which they are looking to expand their remit, and also they are looking for new places to invest. So we are pitching Malta as an ideal place for them to continue increasing their investment. And this is what we'll be continue doing. We will continue pushing Malta's name on an international level because we do believe that the future is a digital one. where we need to be prepared to make the best possible use of all the opportunities which the digital aspect offers our country. This is our vision, that of going towards a digital Malta, Malta Digitali, and I do invite all the parties, including also the banks, to be a part of our vision for the future and to be part of our project.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for your participation, Honorable Bartolo. It was essential and very crucial to the discussion of today. And Mr. Abela will be closing the meeting for us. Thank you.
I thank you all. I thank you, Minister Bartolo, for your support, Prof. Bonnici and Mr. Josite for your support as well. As you mentioned, Minister, we need more investment, and even like Professor Bonnici, we are as a chamber encouraging small businesses to invest more. We even as a chamber are involved in a big investment coming over. As you know, BCRS, the plastic recovery, is going to be in force in a few months' time, in 14 months' time. And as a chamber representing retailers, we are 25% shareholding in this venture, which is going to be an investment of over 15 million. So I encourage our members to keep investing in Malta and keep growing. And I think that with the support of the banks and the Development Bank and the government, this country will bring more investment, and the investments that we had some months back. And I wish everyone to recover and do the investment needed in this country. Thank you. Thank you and good day.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Yes, thank you very much. Good day.
Thank you, Ross.